For years, Dara Mitchell chased approval like it was oxygen, sacrificing comfort, relationships, and nearly her identity to prove she was enough. But when she walked away from her family's expectations to build a life rooted in passion and grit, she didn't just open a restaurant, she rewrote the recipe for self-worth. This is the story of one woman's quiet revolution, plated with scars, resilience, and the kind of success that doesn't need applause to be real. Suppose you've ever stood at the crossroads between expectation and authenticity. In that case, Dara's journey is the reminder you didn't know you needed. The most meaningful validation is the one you give yourself. Dara Mitchell's hands moved with mechanical precision, her chef's knife a blur against the mountain of scallions before her. The maison kitchen was in full swing, and the clatter of pans, the hiss of sautéing vegetables, and the sharp notes of shouted orders echoed through the air like a symphony of barely controlled chaos. For Dara, it was comforting noise, a rhythm that drowned out the silence of years spent pretending she didn't care about her family's disappointment. Outside, the snow was just beginning to fall again, frosting the windows with a quiet insistence. Inside, the heat of the ovens painted Dara's face with a sheen of sweat. Her sleeves rolled past her elbows, revealing forearms nicked and scarred from a decade in kitchens. These were not wounds. They were medals of honor. Maison was her dream. An intimate restaurant with a seasonal tasting menu built with the last of her savings, a risky loan, and pure willpower. And now, 3 years in, it was finally gaining traction. The local food blog had named her winter squash ravioli one of the best bites of the year. The Michelin Guide had called it thoughtfully daring. She had recently been invited to speak at a culinary symposium in New York. And still, the call from her mother last week had undone her. "We're having a family dinner," her mother had said. "Your brother Ethan's promotion is official. We'd love for you to come." Not a request, not a question, a declaration. As if Dara's success still needed to be measured against Ethan's corporate accolades. As if she were still the family's black sheep, chasing a hobby instead of a profession. She hadn't answered right away. Just stared at her phone as the kitchen buzzed around her. Jessica, her sous chef, had asked if everything was all right. Dara had smiled and nodded, pushing the rising resentment down where it could ferment with the others. And now, as she plated a beet tartare with whipped goat cheese and microgreens, she still didn't know if she would go. "Chef," Jessica called from the pass. "We're ready on table 5. Dara nodded, snapping back to the moment. She arranged the last leaf of sorrel on the plate, stepped back, and nodded. "Run it." Later that night, long after the last table had left and the staff had trickled out with tired waves and good nights, Dara sat alone in the dining room. A half glass of red wine swirled in her hand, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed except for the one above her usual table. She thought of the family dinners growing up, the heavy tablecloth, the way her mother's roast always looked perfect, even if it tasted dry. How Ethan had dominated conversations with stories of football, then internships, then IPOs. And how Dara's updates, culinary school, line cook positions, pop-up dinners, had landed like pebbles in a well, barely heard before the conversation moved on. But this time, something inside her was shifting. Maybe it was the steady growth of Maison. Maybe it was the mentorship program she had quietly launched for young chefs from underserved backgrounds. Or maybe it was just exhaustion from chasing approval that might never come. She picked up her phone and opened a new note. "If I go, I'll bring dessert. Not as a peace offering, as a reminder, I am not less than. I am just different." The dinner was at her parents' home in the suburbs. Dara arrived 10 minutes late on purpose, bearing a box of her signature chocolate torte and a bottle of biodynamic wine. She'd chosen a soft gray dress with clean lines and no frills, chic, professional, and unmistakably Dara. Her mother opened the door, smiling tightly. "Dara, you look thin." "Nice to see you too, Mom." Inside, the house looked the same. Pristine. Cold. Her father stood near the fireplace, swirling scotch. Ethan was already holding court, his wife Dana nodding beside him, their 2 children nestled on the couch with tablets. "Dara!" Ethan beamed. "Still saving the world with thyme and tarragon?" Still measuring worth in stock options? The room went quiet for a beat. Then Dana laughed nervously. Her mother clucked her tongue and guided Dara toward the dining table. Dinner was stilted. Questions about Maison were laced with skepticism. "So, are you profitable yet?" her father asked. "We've been in the black for 2 quarters," Dara replied, launched a catering arm, working on a cookbook. "That's impressive," Ethan said, sounding surprised. "I've even been mentoring students from underserved backgrounds. Saturday mornings, we convert the kitchen into a classroom." By dessert, the tension had softened slightly. Dara's tort was a hit. "I never knew you were this talented," her mother said, fork in hand. "You never asked," Dara replied gently but firmly. Her father cleared his throat. "We may not have understood your choices, but we see your commitment. That matters." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. That night, as she drove back to the city, snow drifting across the windshield, Dara didn't feel vindicated. She felt free. Not because they finally saw her, but because she no longer needed them to. In the quiet of her apartment, she opened her laptop and typed the first line of her cookbook introduction. "This is not a collection of recipes. This is a reclamation." The morning after the family dinner, Dara Mitchell stood by the large bay window of her apartment, sipping strong black coffee as the sun rose over the quiet city. Snow blanketed the sidewalks and rooftops, lending the streets an untouched serenity that stood in sharp contrast to the emotional clutter from the night before. The dinner had not been a triumph, nor a disaster, just a recalibration. A slow tilt toward something new, something unknown. She checked her phone. Jessica had already messaged updates from the kitchen. 2 suppliers delayed by weather, 1 VIP booking confirmed for Saturday, and an enthusiastic note about a new truffle vendor Dara had been considering. Instead of heading straight to Maison, she paused to open her laptop and reread the cookbook introduction she'd drafted late the night before. "This is not a collection of recipes. This is a reclamation." Dara sat with those words. They still rang true. She saved the document and began sketching out chapter outlines, each one a piece of her life told through dishes. The winter working double shifts in Denver. The year she spent traveling through Southeast Asia, learning not only flavors but philosophies. The early mornings with her grandmother, shaping dumplings in flour-dusted silence. By the time she stepped into Maison, her staff was already in prep mode. Jessica greeted her with a warm, flour-dusted smile. "Chef, the trout delivery's delayed. Again. Marcus says we might have to 86 it for tonight." "All right, let's pivot to the halibut. Add the miso glaze and citrus salad. It's still seasonal." Jessica nodded and moved to relay the change. The team worked efficiently, with a cohesion that came from months of mutual respect and shared purpose. This kitchen was more than a business. It was Dara's ecosystem. At noon, Dara hosted a group of young mentees from her culinary outreach program. 8 teens from different boroughs, each wide-eyed and eager, filled the restaurant with energy. Today's session was knife skills and flavor pairing. Dara demonstrated chiffonating basil, then had each student try. Zoe, the most promising of the group, moved with a natural rhythm. Dara watched her and smiled. "You've got the touch. Ever consider applying for our apprenticeship?" Zoe's eyes lit up. "Seriously? We'll talk after class." As the students prepped simple tomato bruschetta, Dara circled the room, offering tips and encouragement. It struck her again how vital this program had become, not just for them, but for her. Seeing them reminded Dara of her start. Hungry, unsure, burning with ambition no one had believed in yet. After the class, she sat with Zoe to discuss the apprenticeship. "It's not glamorous," Dara warned. "Lots of cleaning, long hours, pressure. But if you're serious, it's the best way to learn." Zoe didn't hesitate. "I want it. I want to learn from you." Dara felt a lump rise in her throat. These were the moments that anchored her, that grounded all the chaos in purpose. Later that week, Heather called. Her voice was tight with stress. Florists doubled their quote, My dress fittings are behind. My future mother-in-law insists on including a poem she wrote in the program. I need coffee and real talk. Dara smiled. Name the time. They met at a small cafe near the waterfront. Over cappuccinos and lemon scones, Heather poured out her frustrations. Dara listened, offering practical advice and the occasional sarcastic quip that made her friend laugh despite herself. You always know how to cut through the noise, Heather said. I feel better already. As they walked back to the car, Heather turned serious. I've been meaning to tell you, that tort you brought to your parents' dinner? My mom hasn't stopped talking about it. Said she didn't know food could feel emotional. Dara blinked. She said that? Word for word, small steps. Back at A. Maison, the team was deep in prep for a private event. A renowned art dealer had booked out the space to celebrate a new exhibition. Dara oversaw the plating personally, each dish a miniature sculpture of flavor and form. Between courses, she slipped into the kitchen to check on Zoe, who was shadowing Marcus. Doing okay? Dara asked. Zoe nodded, her face flushed but focused. It's intense, but I love it. Good. Intensity means you're growing. That night, after the guests had left and the staff cleaned the last of the glassware, Dara lingered in the quiet dining room again. Her notebook was open before her. She jotted a few more lines for the cookbook. Cooking for me was never about applause. It was about survival, a way to stay grounded when the rest of the world felt impossible. I learned early that food could carry emotion when words failed. It could offer peace, joy, and memory. It could say what I didn't know how to do, just. As she closed the book, a message pinged on her phone. Her father. Saw a piece in the Times about women chefs shaking up the industry. Thought of you. That was it. No emojis. No elaboration. But Dara stared at the message, a slow warmth unfurling in her chest. Another small step. Another fracture in the glacier of years past. In the weeks that followed, the progress continued in subtle ways. Her mother began calling. Weekly, not with critiques, but curiosity. Ethan emailed to ask if Dara would consider visiting his daughter's school for career day. I want her to know she doesn't have to fit into one mold to be successful, he wrote. The idea that her path, once ridiculed, could now inspire, that her authenticity could ripple outward, was more gratifying than any award. One Saturday, as she cleaned up after a particularly lively youth class, Zoe approached her. Chef, can I show you something? She pulled a folded sheet from her apron, a recipe she'd written herself, inspired by a dish they'd made weeks ago, but with her twist. Dara read it, then looked at her. This is good. You're thinking like a chef, Zoe beamed. You believed in me before I did. That night, Dara wrote again. Success is not a single moment. It is cumulative. Built on small, repeated acts of courage. Of choosing to be yourself when the world insists otherwise. Of offering your story even when no one asks to hear it. Of lifting others as you rise. She stared out the window of her office at Maison. Snow fell again, silent and steady. The same snow that used to make her feel isolated now felt like a kind of hush, a sacred quiet before something new. Her journey wasn't about being the best. It was about being real. And that truth, finally, was enough. Dara Mitchell wiped the condensation from the front window of Maison as she stared into the dim winter street beyond. The restaurant was empty now, chairs turned on tables, lights dimmed, only the gentle hum of the walk-in cooler breaking the silence. Her hands ached faintly from a long day's prep, and the back of her chef's coat was damp from the heat of the kitchen. Yet she lingered. Moments like this were her sanctuary. 2 months had passed since the family dinner. Since then, her world had continued spinning forward, but with subtle, seismic shifts beneath the surface. She was still at the helm of Maison, still shaping her cookbook, still leading the mentorship program for aspiring chefs. But something had loosened inside her, a long-held knot finally beginning to unwind. That knot had a name: validation. And slowly, quietly, Dara had begun to let it go. It had started with brunch at Alma's, a cozy little joint run by an old colleague with mismatched chairs and spray-painted walls. She had taken her family there, hoping the food would speak where she couldn't. Her father, uncomfortable at first, had cleaned his plate and muttered that the shakshuka was the best he'd ever had. Her mother had praised the sourdough. Ethan had asked about the owner, impressed by the concept. Small comments, insignificant to anyone else. But to Dara, they were tectonic. At Maison, she had embraced her role not just as chef and owner, but as mentor and connector. The youth program had blossomed into a core part of her weekly routine. Zoe, her most promising mentee, had flourished in the kitchen, asking sharper questions, challenging ideas, and even suggesting a few plating changes that Dara had adopted. One Saturday morning, as they cleaned up after the final mentorship class of the season, Zoe turned to Dara with a hesitant expression. "Chef Dara, can I ask you something? Kind of personal?" Dara set down a mixing bowl and nodded. "Always. Do you ever feel like no matter what you do, it's still not enough for, the people who are supposed to matter most?" The question pierced her. She saw her younger self in Zoe's eyes. Saw every Christmas where her parents asked when she'd get a real job, every milestone passed in silence, every proud headline or review was ignored. "All the time," Dara replied. "But I've learned something." She wiped her hands on her apron, meeting Zoe's gaze. "What matters most is whether it's enough for you, not for them." Zoe nodded slowly. "I think I needed to hear that." Later that day, Dara sat in her office working on the cookbook. The manuscript was nearly complete now. The chapters were framed around key moments in her journey, meals that defined her, failures that refined her, and the quiet in between, spaces where growth truly happened. She paused over the introduction again. It had morphed from a single paragraph into a deeply personal narrative. Food was never just food for me. It was a memory. It was a rebellion. It was identity. I cooked to speak when I didn't feel heard, to belong when I felt alone, to remember when I was being forgotten. Each recipe in this book is a breadcrumb on the path back to myself. When she sent the draft to her publisher that evening, her hands trembled slightly. That same night, a text came from her mother. "Started reading the article you sent about women in culinary leadership. Proud of you, Dara. Even if I never said it enough. No emojis, no disclaimers. Just the truth." Dara reread the message 5 times. The next day, she found herself in a flower shop, helping Heather choose new centerpieces after a delivery mix-up. Her friend was panicking. The wedding was just days away. But Dara's calm, collected presence helped settle the storm. Heather said as they arranged white tulips and eucalyptus, "I always thought you were the black sheep of your family. Turns out you're the trailblazer." Dara blinked. "I'm not." "Sure, they'd call me that," Heather smirked. "That's because you're still in the middle of the story. Wait until they see how it ends." That evening, Ethan brought his children to tour Maison. Dara led them through the kitchen, letting them touch the spice jars and taste fresh dough. The kids giggled as she showed them how to shape gnocchi. "You're good with them," Ethan said quietly, watching Dara kneel to speak eye level with his daughter. "Thanks. I guess I just remember what it felt like to not have someone do that for me." He looked at her, something unspoken passing between them. A shared regret, a silent offering. The next week, Dara was invited to speak at a local women's leadership panel. She sat beside architects, tech founders, and educators. When asked what kept her going through setbacks, she answered, "Faith in the long game. I stopped measuring myself by applause and started measuring by alignment, with who I am, with what I believe." Applause followed, but it was the quiet nods, the tearful eyes in the audience, that truly moved her. One night after closing, Jessica approached her with a hesitant smile. "Chef, would you consider writing a second book, but not recipes, about all this? About your story, about what you've built here?" Dara's eyes widened. "You think people would read that?" Jessica nodded. "I think people need that." As winter softened into spring, the world outside thawed, and so did the final layers of ice inside Dara's own heart. Her relationships with her family, once marked by silence and misunderstanding, were now shaded by nuance. Her mother sent her soup recipes. Her father sent her a photo of a dish he'd tried to replicate from her menu. Ethan brought the kids back monthly. The change wasn't loud or sweeping, but it was real. In a quiet moment, sitting at her usual table after hours, Dara returned to her cookbook one last time. She wrote, "We spend so much of our lives chasing permission. Permission to be who we are, to take up space, to deviate from the script. But the truth is, permission isn't given. It's claimed. In messy kitchens and tearful brunches. In the stillness of the night after a long shift. In the smallest acts of defiance that whisper, 'I am enough as I am.'" She closed the notebook. Tomorrow, there would be new recipes, new challenges, and new quiet triumphs. But tonight, Dara Mitchell was full in the deepest, truest sense, and that at last was enough.